every single 3rd overall pick in the NHL draft since the year 2000. We got a good group of players here. Now, before I get started, one thing I like to do is actually change up the tiers, as I feel like the too soon to judge tier is kind of like a coward tier. Even if the player, hasn't played the game in the NHL yet, or they're just a rookie, whatever. Basically, I feel like it's a lot more fun to try and guess which tier they're going to end up in. Also, to the Hall of Fame talent one, I don't really like that. I prefer just do like franchise player, as I feel like a lot of times a top line contributor can end up into the Hall of Fame, whereas a franchise player is kind of like your next tier of greatness. So I'm starting out here, guys, with the 2000 3rd overall pick, Marion Gavrik. This one was actually kind of tough for me. I wasn't sure between franchise and top line contributor, as on the Minnesota Wild, he was a pretty nasty player, won a cup with the LA Kings, was also a very good player with the New York Rangers, but I don't know if he was quite that franchise tier. I think for him, he's a very high-end top line contributor. That one, though, for me was definitely torn. Now, this next guy here, when I loaded this in, I honestly wasn't sure who he was, so I had to Google 2001 NHL draft to find out who got drafted 3rd overall. And it's this guy named Alexander Svitov by the Tampa Bay Lightning, 37 points in 179 games. So yeah, I never heard of the guy for good reason. He's a flat out bust for sure. Jay Bumster here. So Bumster, like Gavrik, for me is kind of between that franchise and top line. On Florida, he was one of the best, young defensemen in the NHL. Never like a big scorer, but very solid defensively. Kind of reminds me of like a Jacob Slavin, I'd say. Still a very good defenseman on the Calgary Flames. The question is, was he ever a franchise defenseman? And I feel like I'm going to have to say no, but he definitely was, a top pairing defenseman. After that, to Nathan Horton. So Nathan Horton's tough. Like, he had some good years for sure in Boston, helping them win that cup 2011. Went to Columbus, never played a game again. So his prime was pretty short. In that prime, he was definitely a top line. I wouldn't say he was a franchise. Outside of the prime, like, would you say he's good, not worth the pick, top line contributor? I don't think he scored enough for me to be a top line contributor. I would say he's a good player, but not worth the pick. And after that, guys, we have Cam Barker. If you never heard about him, there's a good reason for that. He's another one that's a flat-out bust for sure. So what draft was that? That was the 2004 draft, I believe. And that draft, I'm pretty sure, had some nasty players in it. And for whatever reason, Chicago decided to go with Cam Barker, 3rd overall. It was Ovechkin and Malkin that went 1 and 2. So yeah, but Andrew Ladd, obviously solid player. Blake Wheeler. See, that's one thing I always forget. Andrew Ladd just seems so much older than Blake Wheeler. They're actually from the same draft. Like, Blake Wheeler seems like he's still late 20s, early 30s. Andrew Ladd seems like he's 40 when really both guys, I think, are 35. So that's kind of a weird one. But yeah, the Cam Barker draft pick there by Chicago was rough. Now, one cool thing I noticed, he's actually still playing hockey over in France. So good for him. Even though he's not in the NHL anymore, he'll still be playing in hockey. But doesn't change the fact, without a doubt, flat out bust. Now, Jack Johnson's a tough one. Another defenseman here. For me, it's between good, not worth the pick, and flat out bust, as I don't know if you can call him a flat out bust, as he's still playing in the NHL, and like on LA, he was a solid defenseman. He got traded for Jeff Carter when Jeff Carter was, a top 6 or even first line forward, because he's a good defenseman. On Columbus, he wasn't that bad for a little bit. Like, these two guys below him are definitely worse players, definitely flat out busts. I know Johnson now isn't the greatest defenseman, but, it's been some years. I'm going to say... Oh, man, this is tough. I'm going to say Jack Johnson was a good player, but not worth the pick. If you draft him in, like, the 2nd round, I don't think anyone's calling him a bust, which I think is kind of, like, what this tier is for. I should mention as well, Jack Johnson was literally an Olympian during his prime, so, yeah, I don't think any busts are making the Olympic team. Jonathan Toews, without a doubt, franchise player. He captained the Chicago Blackhawks with 3 Stanley Cups. One of the best two-way players in the NHL during his prime, still is. I would say, him and Bergeron over the last 10 years, you're kind of 1 and 2 two-way forwards in the NHL. 3 Stanley Cups, he won gold medals. I think you can count, international success. Won a Selke Trophy one of the years Bergeron didn't win it. Never like a big points guy, but definitely a solid producer on that end. So, yeah, I don't think I would argue with Jonathan Toews being a franchise player. Kyle Turris, another tough one. For me, it's in between good, not worth the pick, and flat out bust. Like, he's worse than Nathan Horton. Actually, honestly, he's probably produced not quite as much as Horton, but similar. And Horton's out of the NHL now, where Turris is still playing. So then it's like an argument. Horton's ceiling was better, but Turris has a bit more longevity. If you pick Turris in the 2nd round, do you call him a bust? No, which means good player, not worth the pick. I'm leaning towards that, because yeah, the guy's still in the NHL. He had, a few seasons, like 4 or 5, I think, in Ottawa, where, he's like a 50-point guy. Nashville is kind of where his career started to decline, but yeah, I would say he's a good player, not worth the pick. Zach Bogosian. So this is another one. It's in between good, not worth the pick, and flat out bust. I'm leaning towards flat out bust just because, like, I think Jack Johnson has accomplished a lot more in his career than Bogosian, and at this point they're kind of at a similar point. But Jack Johnson, like I said, had a much higher peak. Oh my gosh, this one's tough too. I'm gonna say Bogosian flat out bust because I almost put Johnson in flat out bust, and like I said, in his prime, Johnson was a much better D-man than Bogosian. Matt Duchene here, so for sure he's not a bust. For me, it's either good, not worth the pick, or top line contributor. I would say Duchene, right now, he's not having the best year. Like, as recently as 2 years ago, he was a point per game guy in Ottawa. Even last year, nationally, he was still pretty solid. This year is a bit slower. He's an Olympian, played good in Colorado. I would say he's a top line contributor. Might be like a lower end top line contributor, but still, Duchene's a top line guy. Eric Goodbranson. This is another one. Like, it's so weird with these defensive defensemen. He's got a lot of games played, but he's got, like, no points. And whenever I hear about him, they always say how he's, like, a good heart and soul guy, which isn't really something you want to hear about your 3rd overall pick. Like, you can have a late round pick, be a heart and soul guy, and, a good, locker room dude. It doesn't have to be your 3rd overall pick. That's a franchise guy you want to rely on. So, for that, I'm going to say flat out bust, because even good, not worth the pick, if you drafted Goodbranson in the 2nd round, I mean, you're still probably a little bit upset with that pick. 3rd overall, I don't know, it might be a bit harsh, but I'm putting him in flat out bust. Jonathan Huberdeau. So some people might be surprised by this. For sure, he's a top line contributor. I'm thinking maybe franchise player. Like, he's looking like a franchise player down in Florida. One of the most underrated players in the NHL, in my opinion. It used to be his line mate in Barkov. Now I think it's Huberdeau. You guys look at his stats. His last few seasons, he's averaging over a point per game. You just never hear about him because he plays for the Panthers. So it's tough because, like, his first, handful of seasons, he was more like good, not worth the pick, maybe top line. Then he was top line. Now he's looking like a franchise winger. What is the requirement to be a franchise guy? It's tough. I mean, I'm going to put him top line just because he does have, more than just the last 3 seasons where I think he's looking like a franchise guy. First few seasons are good. We'll take the average. We'll say he's a top line dude. So Alex Galchenyuk here. He's a guy that could play with the flat out bust, but I'm not going to because literally a year ago, I think, or 2 years ago, he had 40 points, and before that, he was regularly like a 40 to 50 point guy, which is a good player, but not worth the 3rd overall pick. I don't think his last year and a half of hockey qualifies for flat out bust. You gotta look at his whole career. Jonathan Duran. So we got 2 guys who have played for Montreal. I would say for him, it's either good, not worth the pick, or top line contributor. The thing is, it's not really a top line contributor. He's like a 2nd line contributor, not a 1st line contributor, or a top pairing D-man for that matter. So I would say Duran's good, not worth the pick. There were a few seasons there where he looked like a top line guy, but no longer. Leon Draisaitl. You guys know, Draisaitl 3. If you're wondering why that's a thing, it's because he was drafted 3rd overall, and pretty much every draftee who gets picked 3rd overall does this when they're taking the picks with 1, 2, and 3. My guy Draisaitl went like this. Franchise player, without a doubt. I mean, last year he won Art Ross, Hart, as well as the Ted Lindsay Award. Dude cleaned up. When you have Connor McDavid on your team, who I think everyone can agree is the best player in the NHL, and you're outscoring him, that is a big-time statement. So, yeah, if anyone wants to argue Draisaitl's not a franchise player, let me know in the comments. I'll be there. I'm willing to argue that one. After that, you have Dylan Strome. So, Strome had 1 good year on Chicago where he was looking like a top-line guy. Other than that, though, for the rest of his career, I would say he's a good player, but not worth the 3rd overall pick, especially when you had Marner go 4. Marner was the pick there, number 3 for sure. Could he end up being a top-line contributor? Yeah, but right now I'd say Strome's definitely in the good, not worth the pick category. PLD obviously just got traded for Line. I would say he's a top-line contributor. Bit of a slow start to this season, but I think all the drama in Columbus, gets traded to Winnipeg, quarantines for 2 weeks, now he's injured. I'm just not going to count, the 7 games he's played this year. And if you look at the last 3 seasons, I would say he's a top-line guy. Might not score as much as some of the other players here, but I think he's that good 2-way, young power forward. Puts him in the top-line contributor for me. Now, Miro Heiskanen, this is tough. He's a defenseman. Heiskanen, for me, is a potential franchise defenseman. Right now, I'd say he's already a top-line contributor, and you got to remember the guy's 21 years old, something like that. And I was saying how I took out like the too soon to judge tier because I thought that was a coward way out. In that regard, if I'm basing it on right now, it's top line, but I think he'll turn into a franchise defenseman. So, I don't know. Like right now, I think he's a top line contributor, but he's young enough if you want to base it on potential. I'm saying Heiskanen ends up being a franchise defenseman. I think he's just that good. Now, after that, you have Kokoniemi. Definitely not a bust. Some people like to say that. It's way too early to call him a bust. And even then, I think he's a good player, but he's not a top line contributor yet for me. So I would put him in the good not worth the pick category. He could turn into a top line contributor, but unlike Heiskanen, that's not where my money would be. My money would be on him ending up as a good player, but not worth the pick. If Dylan, Strome, and him are both, 45 to 55 point guys, that's what I think is going to happen. Now we have two more players not shown here. The first is Kirby Dock, 3rd overall pick in the 2019 draft. So for me, obviously you could have put Kirby Dock in the too early to tell tier, but we're not cowards on this channel. So based on his rookie season, Dock would be a good not worth the pick player as he only had like 20 points in 60 games, but it was his rookie season. I think he played 3rd line center most of that season. So if I had to guess, I would say Kirby Dock ends up as a top line contributor. Honestly, the guy right next to him, Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think is a pretty similar comparable for him. And then finally, the guy who just got taken 3rd overall like 6 months ago, maybe not even, Tim Stützle. He's only got, 15 NHL games played. So this is basically all I guess where he's going to end up. For me, it's at least top line contributor, maybe franchise player, but I think franchise player is getting a little ahead of ourselves. So I'm going to put Stützle as the top line contributor. I think he's a bit more offensive than Dock, but I think Dock's a more well-rounded game. And again, I think there's a bit of franchise player potential for Stützle, but I'm going to, be a bit more realistic and have him at that top line contributor spot. So right there, guys, I look at my 3rd overall tier list. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Again, love, hearing all the different feedback. I tried to be as fair as I possibly could. And now that I'm finished my rankings, one of my favorite things to do is actually look at the community rankings, see how they compare. So then I got 5 here. Might as well take a look at all of them. Marion Gavrik, like I said, that was one where I thought maybe we should put in a Hall of Fame, but it was really close. I can see Kokoniemi there. He went too soon to judge, but honestly, very, very similar list to us there. Next one here, again, it looks pretty similar. He's got Taves and Draisaitl as the only 2 Hall of Famers. I don't know how. I already forgot this guy's name. Svitov, I think it was, drafted by Tampa. How does he have him as a top line contributor? I'm assuming that was a misclick. Goodbranson there and Burke are the only 2 flat-out busts. So, yeah, again, a pretty similar one. Wow. Taves is not a Hall of Fame talent because, obviously, they didn't change the tiers. He was literally ranked as one of the top 100 players of all time. I'm not sure about that one. Nathan Horton, a flat-out bust, is also a bit interesting. Maybe they didn't recognize who he was. Again, pretty similar. Draisaitl is not a Hall of Fame talent. I think it's pretty shocking. This guy added a superstar category, which I like as a category. I think Draisaitl will end up as a Hall of Fame player, though. I think you can definitely say that. And he's got Huberdeau and Gavrik both kind of above the top line, so I kind of like that one. I would probably put Heiskanen in there as well, but then the rest of them I would probably keep the same. So I like that guy's tier list, aside from Draisaitl not being at the top. But that's going to do it, guys, for this 3rd overall pick tier list video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, leave that thumbs up. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit the sub button. And as always, guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.